7:40, so I'll call the open session of St. John Council Finance Committee to order. Welcome to our guests that are with us. The first order of business we have is actually item 2 on the agenda, which is the minutes of May 22nd. So if I could have somebody move the minutes of May 22nd, or worship, seconded by Councillor Radwin. On the question, all in favor signify by aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Item number 3 is an approval of the agenda that's been circulated. There are no additional items, so I'll take a motion to approve the agenda. For worship, and Councillor Hickey, on the question, all in favor signify by aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Item number 4 is disclosures of conflict of interest, if any. Seeing none, we'll carry on. There is no consent agenda. Takes us to business matters. Item 6. Item 6.1 is our Deloitte audit results for last year, and I'll pass this over to Mr. Levine to introduce it.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair and the members of the Finance Committee. I'm pleased to have Steve Lund here today. He's partner with Deloitte, along with Maggie Mee, senior accountant with Deloitte. They are going to walk the committee through our 2023 audit results. And when they're done their presentation, and after any questions to staff are completed, members of the committee, along with the auditors, will join a in-camera session. You should see that as meeting number 3 that was sent to you folks. And when you're done that, you can join back to the open session. So with that, I will leave it to Mr. Lund.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see everyone this morning. As noted, I'm Steve Lund, audit partner at Deloitte. I think I've signed your audit report for somewhere around 6 or 7 years. And Maggie is also in our St. John practice, and she's worked on the audit for a few years. So we're both here to share what we would deem all the relevant information that you need to hear in order to confidently approve the financial statements, which is ultimately the goal of what you're getting into, right? So we'll present a document. The content is probably somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes, but can be expanded with questions and so on. That again summarize all the stuff that you need to hear in order to feel confident approving. So at a 10,000 foot level, I'll say that we're largely complete what we need to do to sign the audit report. As always, the compiling the financial statements of the city takes a lot of work from our team and your team, so we'll congratulate the teams on getting it across the line with all of the ABCs and stuff that roll up into the consolidation. It's not a simple process, so congratulations to all those involved in putting the work in. From a what's different from last year perspective, probably the big headline item would be the implementation of the asset retirement obligation standard. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but that would be the big item. It's been successfully implemented. You booked some adjustments that all municipalities across Canada have to do. And it's just a new accounting standard that came into effect this year, right? So that would have put an extra lift on the team. But both teams work together to get that wrestled to the ground. So I'll start on the executive summary in the document that would be in your package. And I'll start by just highlighting that the audit scope and the terms of the engagement would be unchanged from last year. So your financial statements are in accordance with public sector accounting standards, and that remains the same. And our audit is performed in accordance with Canadian generally accepted auditing standards, okay? If you keep going down on that same page, you'll see a few additional items that I'll highlight. One is what we call a significant risk. And these are things that we must communicate to those charged with governance. We would identify, probably 50 or 100 risks with any set of financial statement. And we classify them as either lower, higher, or significant. The significant ones are usually the ones that are tied to areas of judgment or significant estimate. And so the two that we've identified are management override of controls, which is a significant risk in all audits, and it's tied to management's unique ability to perpetrate fraud by circumventing its own controls. And then the second one is tied to presumed risk around revenue in businesses. And again, if you look at all the frauds that have happened over the years, a lot of them happen in revenue. And so you presume that that's where a significant risk exists. So this would be consistent with past years. And the conclusion around all of that work is that we came back clean. Maggie will talk about more specifically what we did to cover those risks in a minute. On the far right of that page, you'll see a caption that's labeled uncorrected misstatements. So as part of our audit, we determine a materiality. It's based on thresholds that CPA defines, and it's really, what would change users' decisions on a set of financial statements, right? And so for the city, we would have a materiality calculated at 6.9 million, and that compares to about 6.4 in the prior year. What's important to note is that if there was a $5 million error, you would absolutely hear about it. Anything over 345,000 that we would identify would be reported to you. If those added up to more than 6.9, it means that I can't sign the audit report without adjusting those errors, right? So that's good context for you. And then you'll see the really important number is that the uncorrected misstatements are sitting at 0. So anything that we looked at with management was adjusted, and there's no uncorrected misstatements that came as a result of our audit. So it's a clean number, which is good considering the size of the city, right? If we go to the bottom section of that report, we'll see the outstanding matters and next steps. So a lot of these would be normal course at this point in the game. Certainly approval of the financial statements from you folks, completion of our concurring review processes and things like that usually come after this meeting. Receipt of management signed representation letter. We're just putting the final touches on consolidation with management and on the asset retirement obligations. But with both of those things, we don't anticipate any changes to the financials. It's just to make sure that the file is really solid. And then finally would be the completion of any subsequent events. So we have to ask questions about, whether there are any big transactions that should be disclosed or adjusted for that would come after December 31st. So we complete that right up to the audit report date. All that's normal stuff, though. If you keep going down, you'll see 2 more boxes that will then conclude the executive summary. So one is ongoing concern, and that's that our assessment of the management's going concern assessment is clean, so that you'll be able to continue in the future consistent with past years. And then finally on the far right, that we believe that we're going to be in position to sign a clean audit report pending the resolution of all those outstanding matters. So with that, I might just take a quick pause, see if there's any questions there, and then following that, Maggie will talk through the significant risk, and then we'll give you a bit of a flavor around the asset retirement obligations piece, which is new. But before I get to that, just wanted to check, Mr. Chair, if there's any questions.
Thanks, Stephen. To the committee, does anybody have any questions so far? I don't see any, so I think we're good to continue.
Great. Over to you, Maggie.
Awesome. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to discuss our significant audit risks and events. So as Steve mentioned before, one of the main ones is management override of controls, and I'm going to be touching on what we did essentially to address this. So the biggest one being is we look at all of the journal entries that are posted within the year, because this is where there's most likely to discover errors or potential instances of management that has perpetrated fraud. And we use a sophisticated analytics tool, and what it does is that it searches for particular characteristics that might indicate something that's being done that shouldn't. So a common example might be entries that are posted on the weekend, because usually people don't work on the weekend, so maybe they're posting something during that time because they think it won't be caught, or maybe they post it in an account that's not used very often because it doesn't get reviewed by management, so potentially something fraudulent could go unnoticed. So all of our procedures essentially check for all of those characteristics, and then any entries that potentially meet those characteristics are then further analyzed and corroborated with management. And through that process, we discovered that there was no instances of material misstatement or fraud, which is what we like to see.
And guys, this is one of the areas that probably evolves the most in the CPA world because of the improvements in the technology solutions that can exist, right? So these days, our solution would have AI enablement to try to identify some of those words that we talked about that might indicate that something smells fishy, and then we can use analytics on all the frauds that have happened to see what the common characteristics are. But for any accounting or audit geeks out there listening, this is one of the funner areas.
Yep, I agree.
At the risk of losing all credibility.
It's one of my favorite parts of the audit. Anyway, so the next one, as Steve mentioned earlier, is the presumed risk of fraud on revenue recognition. So this is standard across all audits, and the way that we address this is through various procedures. So the first one being kind of any government funding that's received, we just kind of confirm by reaching out to those funding bodies and making sure that the revenue on your books matches what the funding body actually gave you. We also test all kind of internal controls surrounding revenue procedures. So that's making sure that proper approvals are being done, that proper review is being done to ensure that these transactions are complete and accurate and there's nothing fishy going on. And then for items that we can't confirm, we just will select a sample of transactions and vouch those to the appropriate supporting documents. So things like invoices, proof of payment, that sort of thing. We did do a lot of procedures around government transfers, as that is a bigger kind of revenue area here, and we identified that quite a bit of funding has come in, so we did extensive procedures on that area of revenue as well, and came to the conclusion that there were not only misstatements or evidence of fraud or management manipulation in terms of revenue. So the next piece we're going to talk on is asset retirement obligations, but do you guys have any questions on the significant risks that we discussed, or similar to last year, but always good to refresh?
Perfect. So I might just tee Maggie up for this one. So in Canada, as a company, you probably apply one of like 6 sets of accounting standards, right? So there's some that apply to private companies. There's some that apply to public companies called IFRS. If you're operating in the US, it'd be US GAAP. And each of those accounting frameworks have their own set of rules. And it'd be great if they're all the same, but unfortunately, they're not. And so the one that you guys follow is called public sector accounting standards. And in all the other ones, there was always a concept called asset retirement obligations. PSAS is the last of the standards to implement this type of thing. And the concept is that if you own an asset with which you must, tear it down in the future or remediate some form of environmental cause around it or fix it up or something like that, and costs must be incurred in the future that are legally yours, then rather than book them when you spend them, you should estimate what they are and discount them and then book them today. And that's essentially what had to be implemented now. So if you think of the work that your team had to do, would have been, engaging with engineering firms and others inside the operations of the business to say, okay, so what obligations will exist in the future, calculating what they are. So it's a pretty complex exercise. If you look at some financial statements like NB Power as an example, they would apply IFRS. They would have asset retirement obligations related to the Point Lepreau generating station as an example, right? So all the municipalities across Canada, all the provincial governments across Canada, so anyone that applies public sector accounting had to do this exact same exercise. And so from our perspective, we don't do this every day because you don't implement a new standard like this every day. We do have people in Deloitte Canada that's their day job. They do it all day long and they work with multiple municipalities. So we engage with those folks to bring that Canadian perspective so that when we're testing it, we can be efficient and effective and provide the right insight to management. So that's just a bit of a tee up just so that you know what it is, because you'll see the numbers on your financial statements and they're not tiny numbers, right? But Maggie, maybe you can elaborate on what the team did and what the findings were.
Yep. So as Steve mentioned, we do have a group of assurance specialists who have really honed in on ARO, or asset retirement obligations. So we brought them onto the team, which was new for this year, to really just hone in and focus on this part of the statements. So essentially what they did was they worked with at the engineering firm that was engaged by the city to essentially help analyze and provide the data to determine a calculation of what this liability should be. And through doing that, our team was able to corroborate the estimate that was done, as well as analyze the data and ensure that the information is complete and accurate. So it's quite a detailed process, because you're looking at, how many stories are each building, what is the square footage of each building. So there's quite a bit of data that goes into this analysis and coming up with a reasonable estimate. And through this process, we were able to identify that there wasn't any management bias in the estimate, and that the opening balances were correct, and that largely there were no misstatements identified, which is important, especially with something new like this. That being said, when introducing something new and quite complex, there's always room for improvement. So another reason why we brought these specialists on was we thought they could provide some useful insights to not only the management team, but kind of the city as a whole, in terms of the nuances of accounting around these more complex areas. So a couple things they identified was just to ensure that the data that the city is keeping as support for this calculation does agree to all the inputs, because there are quite a bit, and it does result in some discrepancies there. So ensuring that your backing data corroborates your calculation is key. The other piece would just be ensuring that the database, I believe it's called the GIS database, which is where all of the data that the engineers used to create the estimate, you want to ensure that that data agrees to what you're saying your capital assets are, because that's sort of the basis of this calculation. So if there's discrepancies between those numbers, it just creates more room for potential error or inaccuracies in your final estimate. So those were kind of the two big takeaways, but overall, we didn't find any evidence of a material misstatement for the first year of it being implemented.
Yeah, and those recommendations will be part of management's processes and controls in future years, right? Because now that it's in, every building that you build or any asset you acquire, you got to consider whether it needs an ARO. You've got to build the ARO into your systems and your regular processes, because once it gets booked, there's still changes that happen. It doesn't hit surplus or accumulated surplus right away. It gets amortized over time through your fixed assets. So it's going to be a thing that your team deals with every year, right? So those recommendations were to help make those annual processes smoother and tighter. So that's all good.
Mm-hmm.
Might be good to pause there, guys, just because it's a bit of accounting complexity. Any questions on that, or does that all make sense?
Committee? No, I think we're good. Not that it all makes sense, but
enough that we're okay.
that's enough. Yes, we're all right.
No material misstatements. That's the biggest takeaway. Excellent. All right, so I'll discuss some significant accounting policies, judgments, and estimates. So essentially, in all financial statements, there's going to be areas where management is making estimates as to what the amounts could be. So for the city, we identified allowance for doubtful accounts. So that's essentially provision for the amount of accounts receivable that you won't ultimately receive, because perhaps the person owing might default or might not be able to make a payment. So you normally make a provision for the amount that you estimate you won't receive. Useful lives of capital assets, and this is what impacts what your depreciation is. So, for example, you might estimate that a building has a 30-year useful life, and that's how you depreciate the asset over the useful life of the building. But say, for example, if you decide to tear down the building, then obviously that estimate is no longer accurate. Other things would be, accruals and assumptions related to pension plans. So in order to address these estimates and ensure that we're comfortable with it and that you guys would be comfortable with it, is we just tailor our audit procedures to make sure that we're challenging management's assumptions in these estimates, as well as getting any evidence we can to corroborate that the estimate is reasonable. So a common one for accounts receivable that's being written off, we will ask for proof that you've tried to collect and the customer failed to make the payment. So that would be an example of a procedure we would do there. So in completing those procedures, we came to the conclusion that management estimates were reasonable and appropriate. So that was everything kind of for estimates and significant accounting policies. If you guys have any questions before moving on. Okay, excellent. The next part is just communication points. So these are essentially things that, based on CPA, we are required to communicate to you. This is no different from last year, and it's all very standard, but it's just ensuring that we've communicated everything we are responsible for to the committee and management throughout the audit. So it's kind of almost like a checklist that you might want to go through maybe before you make your final approval, but there isn't anything too different or outside of the norm in terms of our communication requirements and those being met. The next appendix just discusses group audit, and this is because the consolidated financial statements include all of the controlled entities, as you know, so Harbor Station, St. John Transit, all of those entities, and we've also disclosed the different materialities. So as you can see, this is a key part to tailoring our procedures, as our materiality is kind of proportionate to the overall earnings of each of these individual entities. And that's what we base sort of our entire audit on for each entity, as well as the whole kind of city of St. John. Our next appendices 3 is just different Deloitte resources. So this can be helpful, as I know many of you vary in different backgrounds. And if you're looking for any sort of kind of financial references, these can be helpful for you. Those are pretty standard as last year, but are always kind of just a reminder that those are there if you have.
Yeah, and I find since this is an audit and accounting presentation, you'll see a lot of these are very accounting related. But for this committee, what might be more relevant is even just searching Deloitte Center for Corporate Governance. We do have loads of material that's very helpful for people that sit on boards or committees like yourselves, and it often speaks to some of the most cutting edge topics that are on people's agendas. So it's good to stay fresh. So it's Deloitte Center for Corporate Governance if you want to take a look.
Excellent. And last but not least is just our draft management representation letter. So this is a letter that we get from the city's management, and essentially it just confirms that management has fulfilled their responsibility to ensure fair presentation of the financial statements. This is not very different from what we've seen in prior years. It would just include, we've added a line for the asset retirement obligation, as that was new this year, and management did have the responsibility of providing us the data, as well as ensuring that the provision was as accurate to their ability. And that brings us to the end of our results document. So we're open for questions, or Steve, if you have other comments.
Oh, well said. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, team. To the committee, does anybody have any questions before we step out into the private session to see if we have any questions there? Looking around, we see pretty good. Mr. Levine, do you have anything to add?
No, we look forward to seeing you folks return.
Yay!
So at this point, to Deloitte and to the committee. We have another session set up, so we'll leave this one. Staff will hang around to wait for us to come back, and we'll meet up in that other session. Okay, we'll see you then.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Nice. Please stand by. We're on our way back.
We're on our way back and you guys are in trouble.
I was just wondering if I have a job for another year. Am I good?
Craig's out, Jody's out.
Just wait till your dad gets home. I think we've just got to let people in, do we?
They should all be in now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Levine, just checking in with necessary resolutions that we have, just recommending the audit report to council.
That's correct, and we'll bring all the relevant documents on the 19th of August. So, yeah, just look for a resolution from Finance Committee to approve. Actually, sorry, Chair, I'm going to go through my presentation and all the resolutions are in there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So coming back from we don't have any extra questions, I think, coming back from the in-camera session. So, Mr. Levine, we'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. Hey, everybody see my screen okay?
We can.
Good afternoon, committee members. I am pleased to provide an overview of the 2023 audited financial results. The creation of these financial statements is a complex process involving several entities consolidated into one set of financial statements. We prepare well over 70 entries for these statements, and as you just heard, implementing a new accounting standard can also add to the additional workload. However, I would like to recognize Fareel Parikh, Andrew, and Melissa Martin from the Finance Department, as they did much of the heavy lifting on getting these statements across the finish line, along with our auditors from Deloitte. So as the committee just heard from Deloitte, the city has received a clean audit opinion for the December 31st, 2023 financial statements. Finance Committee is familiar with our legislation through the MB Local Governance Act around balanced budgets and not owning or operating a corporation for the purpose of making a profit. So while we are required to set the budget and run our business based on the Local Governance Acts, we are required to report our annual financial results under the public sector accounting standards. One of the major reporting requirements is that the city is required to consolidate all entities into one set of financial statements. This would include entities such as TD Station, Canada Games Aquatic Center, St. John Library, St. John Board of Police Commissioners, St. John Energy, just as examples. As Steve Lund noted, there was a new standard implemented for 2023. The new asset retirement obligation standard resulted in a calculated liability of just over $16 million based on two sets of asset classes related to number one, buildings that may have potential asbestos remediation, and these would be typically our pre-1999 buildings, and some fuel tanks at our transit facility. The standard is a public sector standard and does not impact our annual budgeting process. As I stated earlier, creating the consolidated financial statements is a very complex process. We are required to add in all other funds of our ABCs. There are changes in the accounting and presentation of numbers. We need to eliminate revenue and expenses between entities. And most importantly, the city's requirement of a balanced budget is not based on these financial statements. This slide provides an overview of the major accounting differences. I won't go through each of them, but for the general utility fund, items such as principal repayments are expensed, and we are allowed to have reserve balances. Where under consolidated financials, assets are amortized, funding for capital is a revenue item, and there are no reserve balances allowed. This slide is just a quick overview of all the entities that are included in our consolidated statements. So when we do look at our consolidated financial statements, particularly our statement of financial position, or what could be considered a balance sheet, it really tells our story. It is more than just numbers. The city's financial health continues to improve, largely due to the financial policies implemented along with our long-term financial plan. Debt continues to decrease, and the city's infrastructure deficit is a critical financial indicator that we continue to monitor. Very positive note is that the consolidated debt is now at 58.8 million, which is down from a high of 330 million in 2018. Net debt is a key performance indicator for municipalities' overall financial health. The higher the level of net debt, the more future revenues will be needed to fund past transactions and events. As you can see from this slide, that the general fund debt is down to 77.18 million from a high of just over 119 million in 2014. Utility long-term debt is down to just over 68 million from a high of 107 in 2017. Continuing to improve our financial health in terms of reserves with a consolidated balance of just over 48.7 million. You can see the overall increase in our general fund operating and capital reserves over the years since 2015, where we started with essentially none, to where we are today in 2023. This slide shows you the infrastructure deficit continues to be focused, with 41.56 million of assets being amortized in 2023 alone. Here is a summary of statement of operations and accumulated surplus, or what we would call income statement. Fairly consistent year over year with an overall positive variance of just over 2.3 million when you compare it to 2022. The annual operating surplus for 2023 was just over 29.6 million, largely due to income from energy sources from St. John Energy's equity pickup that we have to consolidate, 5.7 million, and the actuarial non-cash adjustment of over $17 million related to post-employment benefits. Government transfers were just over $26.9 million for capital projects, and you can see the list on the slide of the various funding components and where that funding comes from. And just lastly, I wanted to confirm that for 2023, our general fund results were positive surplus of $272,855, and that will come in our 2025 budget as a first revenue line item. And our utility came in with a surplus of just over $307,000 for the year end. So here's the list of recommendations for the committee's approval. So we are asking the Finance Committee to approve the audited 2023 consolidated financial statements. Finance Committee approves the 2023 statement of revenue and expenses for the St. John Trade and Convention Center. Finance Committee approves the 2023 City of St. John Trust Funds financial statements. And lastly, that Finance Committee recommends to Common Council to approve the 2023 consolidated financial statements as presented by staff, as well as the Trade and Convention Center statements and the Trust Fund financial statements. And with that, I would be pleased to answer anyone's questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. To the committee, questions? Your Worship, go ahead.
Thank you, Craig. That's impressive. When I read that in the first couple paragraphs about the debt, I was so happy because I think that's one of our biggest accomplishments, of course, along with the reduction of the tax rate of the 20 cents over time. Now, at 330 million in 2018, we must have been paying about 16 million in interest, would we not then? I mean, I just think of how impressive that savings is of not only getting the debt down, but of what we were paying in interest. And then today, the interest rate is far different than 2018. So what we would be paying today. So, it's a huge accomplishment. It's taken those 10 financial policies. It's taken us to be sticking with them and deciding what our priorities are and sticking with our priorities and going forward. But I was just curious about what the numbers, if you knew what they were.
I don't have the exact debt calculations. I know that, certainly we've saved a lot of money in interest and principal payments over the last several years, and this is all a combination of long-term debt being reduced, but also, from a financial asset point of view, our investment in our energy services. So as St. John Energy brings more to the table, that helps us. So it is a combination of a lot of items, but I will say that the biggest variance when you look at it year over year is our debt is decreasing at a very good rate. So.
Now, the other question I had for you was, and I don't know if you know the answer to this one because it's not our business per se, but we talk about reserves and why all the reasons why we need reserves in a long-term plan and that. And I'm just wondering where we would sit with reserves relative to other cities that would be around our size, like, Moncton and Fredericton. Are we behind in reserves? I don't know if you know that answer or not. I couldn't call you this afternoon to get the information.
No, I can tell you I don't have their up-to-date 2023 statements, but from last year, we are considerably lagging behind both cities,
Right.
particularly Moncton. Moncton has significant capital reserves.
Okay, yeah, so that's a place where we need to get to as well, because our infrastructure would be at least as old as Moncton's, if not older, a lot of it, and we're twice the size, so.
Correct.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. So Mr. Levine, I think it would be fair to say we are in our reserves. We are light years ahead of where we were a few short years ago, but we still aren't at the point where we are comparable to a comparable municipality. Does that make sense?
That's correct. And just to elaborate on that, a lot of our capital reserves are allocated and will be used up what we have there today for various projects. So, it is going to be critical for us to keep focusing on that capital reserve and keep building that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Radwin, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I, like the mayor as well, was pretty excited to see the numbers go down from 2018. And it was really great to see, it's even, it's just even a lot from last year that our debt has gone down. So, and with reserves sitting around 48 million, I know, Mayor, one thing I can say is I think that Moncton reserves were around 100 million last year. So Fredericton, I hate to say it, but I find their meetings hard to follow. It's hard to get, there's not a lot of detailed information online, and Moncton doesn't put their budget out there like we do. So you can't even look at a line by line budget. They just kind of post their highlights. So it's a little hard to do comparisons, but it's great. We've got $48 million in reserves there, and it's growing. So that's great news. I was really happy to see that investments from the province and the feds has gone up to over 26 million last year, which was significantly higher than the year before. So thanks to our partners in Fredericton and the provincial and federal government. I was curious about a couple of things. So on page 36, Mr. Levine, the contributions for others, we were budgeted 270,000, but we actually ended up with 1.6 million. Do you know where that would have came? It might have come from many different things, but do you have any idea where that money increase would come from?
Very good news, and that one's a little bit challenging because the budget's not really a budget per se, because we're not comparing apples to apples. But that could have been anything from grants from ME Power, which are not necessarily down in debt, or various other funding mechanisms that we got. I don't have the exact details of what that is in front of me, but I could certainly provide that for you.
Yeah, sure. I'm just kind of curious, the other revenue at 29 million, it's great. I think this is really good news because historically the city was so reliant on unconditional grants and things. So if we're generating our own revenue, that's definitely making us more sustainable too. So that's part of a good news story. And I did want to just kind of mention, I noticed that sick time was up about $500,000, and I just wanted to throw it out there to you, CAO McGovern, if there's anything that you think that staff need to kind of support them. Don't want you to answer anything now, but just keep in your mind that I'm open to listening to anything if there's anything that you're finding. And then I was wondering about the budget for TD Station and why it's over $1 million. Any idea why?
That the budget doesn't take into consideration the funding from the regional services. So that's the delta. Now they were slightly over budget.
So it'll be offset.
It'll be offset
With the
slightly. So, but when you see that, that's not quite, yeah, they didn't come in with an additional $1 million over what the regional facilities gave them. So, yeah, that would scare me as well. And if you don't mind, I will answer just a quick note on that sick leave. A lot of that number is that's actuarial review, so it can go up and down depending on
Okay.
various items. So it may not necessarily be reflective of what is happening within the organization, i.e., more sick time or people are taking more sick time. That's a lot of the time. It's the actuarial review that can fluctuate that number. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I'll
Yeah, it's just the same sort of thing. Like, sometimes people will look at all the different accounting surpluses, and it doesn't mean that there's bucket loads of money sitting in an account somewhere. It's just for accounting purposes, you're kind of showing you're also showing how much of an asset that you would have and things like that. It's not that you have cash in hand. So that's always something that I almost feel like we need to remind people of too. I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to comment.
Yeah, no,
on-
certainly, Counselor. It's just, and this is the challenge, and we keep, sort of running through this. Everybody's been familiar with this presentation, but, reconciling how we budget, which is our true surplus deficits, how we run our business every day, with these consolidated statements that has so many different takes and inputs, and the numbers change significantly, which is not. It is reflective, but it's not how we run our business. So when people say you have all this money, that's not necessarily true, or we have an actuarial adjustment, that's not a real cash item. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much. It's a really good news story that I'm going to keep telling people about.
Thanks, Councillor Redmond. Just touching base, Councillor Hickey, Councillor Norton, do you have any questions?
No questions from me. Happy to eagerly endorse this.
Thank you, Councillor Hickey.
So if you need a motion, I'll put it on the floor.
I'll second it.
Sure, we'll take that motion. I'll just throw my 2 cents in. Councillor Redmond is it's the big point that I really wanted to mention. Was at the end of the day, the city of St. John finished 2023 with surplus of $270,000, which is tiny percent of the budget. But the good news is, we're required to have a balanced budget. We finished the year on balance, and that's good news, especially considering, all the tough things that municipalities go through, and interest rates and costs and inflation and all those things. And really, that's a lot of thanks to the hard work of staff throughout the organization to keep the organization moving in weird financial times. So, yeah, I think it is good news, but I can't say it enough. So I'm glad Mr. Levine said it. I'm glad Councillor Radwin said it. It was a balanced year. There's a very tiny surplus that will carry over to the second following year. But in doing that, we met a whole lot of targets. We stayed on financial plan. We reduced our debt as we saw, which will allow us as we move forward in the future to do more things. So lots of good news there. Councillor Hickey moved all of the staff recommendations with her worship seconding it. So on that motion, are there any questions? Okay, on the motion, I'll take the vote. All in favor signify by aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried unanimously. So thank you for that. Mr. Levine, I think we can say thank you to our guests from Deloitte. They don't need to hang around for the next bit, do they?
No, I told them they could actually jump off even before this presentation. So all good.
Okay.
Thanks. Take care, folks.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you to the team at Deloitte. Great working with you again.
Thanks.
We'll see you at council in August. And so that takes us to item 6.3, which is our draft general and utility capital budgets. Mr. Levine.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. You can see my presentation okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you to the members of the Finance Committee. I am happy to provide you an overview of the draft 2025 General and Utility Fund Capital Budget. These budgets are a combined effort with all the service areas, ensuring that we have an alignment between our service areas, as well as alignment with all the inputs that go into our budget. So these are the various inputs into the capital budgets. We have our asset management plan, council priorities, various approved common council plans, our capital, debt management, and long-term financial plans, climate change, and all the various funding programs we just spoke about in the financial statements. So the overall proposed general fund capital budget is just over $39.9 million. The city share being $21.15 million, and other share being just over $18.75 million. The proposed utility capital budget is just over $14 million, with utility share of just over $8.34 million, and other funding share of just over $5.72 million. This slide shows you that we are in compliance with the capital budget policy, with the general fund's budget of having 17% directed towards new assets and 83% directed towards our renewal. This slide just breaks down the city share for the general fund, with funding coming from borrowing, pay-as-you-go, and our various reserves. We continue to focus on our financial principles, focus on reducing our infrastructure deficit, focusing on increasing or maintaining pay-as-you-go year over year, as well as our reduction in our debt. And again, here's just all our funding from our various partners. This just allows us really more investment into items such as our regional facilities, our tourism, active transportation, street reconstruction, and reimagination, among other things. This is just an overview of the new assets that are included in the 2025 general fund capital budget. So we have the reimagination of the Barbers General Store site. We have an extension of Harbor Passage, otherwise known as the Cove. We have some new equipment needed for Harbor Passage. We have upgrades to Rainbow Park, which will be phase 1. Some vehicle and asset storage for our police, as well as the retail drive realignment project, as well as a new roundabout considered. So the next 3 slides will show where our capital reinvestment is being made. I'm not going to go through each of the projects, but I will highlight a few projects on each of the slides as I go through them. So as you can see, we are continuing with our ER replacement project for $2.5 million this year, for 2025. There will be a phase 1 of the replacement of a fire ladder truck. That will be $1 million. You can see $500,000 to advance the city market strategic plan. Next, we have $600,000 that we're looking to replace the deck at the Lily Lake Pavilion. St. John Police has about a little over $886,000 for various items that they require. $2.68 million for St. John Transit. A large portion of that will be buses, as well as $3 million for our asphalt, curb, and sidewalk program. Total of road reconstruction projects is just over $5.5 million, and you can see from this list the various projects, along with $820,000 for our various storm and dam projects, and lastly some funds to replace some well-needed guide rail. Next, I'll provide a high-level overview of St. John Water's capital budget for 2025. As I stated earlier, the total budget is just over $14 million, with the utility share being $8.3 million, and funding from others at $5.7. And I do also want to highlight, again, as with past several years, that there is no new borrowing for the 2025 capital program. I know that it's very exciting to talk about our pipes underground, but it's not all just about the pipes. The investments that we make allows us to deal with items such as our climate change, ensuring that we have reliable water and wastewater systems. It's also about improving our watersheds and ensuring that the reinvestments are done that aligns with the growth objectives of the city. As you can see, there's significant investments in our sanitary systems. We have wastewater pumping stations. We'll see an investment of over $2.85 million. Continuing upgrades to our water treatment plants at Morna and Greenwood of just over $700,000. As well as sanitary sewer replacement of just over $1.88 million. Also continued investments in our water network and water main renewals. We have the rehabilitation of a water storage tank in Lakewood Heights of just over 2.4 million. We have universal meeting for our 3 unit properties. So this is phase 1 of 3. And large commercial water replacement. This is the 2nd phase. So with that, this presentation is really for information purposes for the Finance Committee. Staff are here and we welcome any comments, questions, feedback on the draft budget. And the final draft for approval will be brought back to the Finance Committee in September. And with that, we're here to answer any questions committee members may have.
Thanks, Mr. Levine. Councillor Radwin, to you.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. I got to tell you, I was a pretty happy gal when I opened this and saw the Glen Road getting paved. Partially paved, not all of it, but from Simpson Drive to Canut is a part that's really, really bad, and that's $1.3 million. I think I have probably talked about it like more times than I can count. So it's wonderful. Thank you so much to Commissioner Hugenholtz. I think it is the worst part of the road in any of the city that I've seen. So that's really good news. Glen Falls Upper Dam assessment getting done. That could end up being very important. Mystery Lake stormwater could really end up helping with some flood mitigation and climate change. And of course, out at Loch Lomond, the detailed design and access road to for the Robertson Lake Dam. Hopefully that some of this work will end up help mitigating some of the problems out in Treadwell. We had a big mess out there. It was quite a shock, actually. And I got to tell you, Lakewood Heights, I know people, it doesn't sound shiny and fun, but the rehabilitation of the water storage tank, staff were out there spending so much time working on that. And when I got chatting with them, found out it hadn't been redone since 1975. And just to give you a feel of that, that was 3 years before I was born. So definitely good to see some replacement done there. I mean, staff are out there so much, I can imagine it'll save us money too. The ERP project is so important, so I'm glad that money's been put there. Some revitalization to the city market. I hope there's some federal funds that are going to be available for that. I would hope so. And then I see that Heatherway's on there. I'm kind of curious if staff can kind of let me know if they have any idea when public engagement will happen. Now I know that we don't have an East Side splash pad on here, but I hope that we will see something for that in the future, because the East Side's the only area of the city that does not have one. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I'm just a happy gal with the Glen Falls Road, I got to tell you. So thank you very much. And I'm just curious if anybody can tell me roughly when public engagement will happen for Heatherway, just so I can try to communicate it out.
Thanks, Councillor Radwin. Staff, anybody able to answer or help Councillor Radwin with the public engagement on Heatherway?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think we're actually doing it because of the development that's up in that area on Heatherway. We'll probably start to design this fall, and then the design will come probably late fall, early in 2025, and then we'll inform people at that point in time once we have a design a little bit more nailed down. To see where it exactly goes, and then we'll actually inform everybody in that area, which we typically do on any of our capital construction projects.
Yeah, so I mean, I know that Champlain Heights has some concerns about traffic flow and stuff, so I'd be remiss to not mention that. You know, and I'm kind of hoping that we will in the future as well see some more investment at the res, because we are getting a ton of development right around Loch Lomond, Hickey Road. So it'd be great if we have amenities over here to kind of match the other areas of the city.
The only thing to keep in mind on this project, it is just a storm sewer. So we aren't doing any road reconstruction. It will just be a sanitary sewer with it'll just be a trench reinstatement. So there's no changes to roads or anything like that for that particular project.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor or Councillor Hickey, Councillor Norton, any questions? Your Worship, go ahead.
I'll just say that the list is, I'm sure very tricky for staff to build that list because we're trying to keep it under the 20% of we see that, and there's needs everywhere. And so I know that when they put these lists together, that there's so much work behind it, and there's so many parameters that they have to look at. Like even if you're going to pave a road, a lot of times they'll look at not only the pavement index, but they'll look at the road bed underneath it. Is it a commuter road? What's the tax base on it? Is transit on it? So there's a lot of considerations to make the list. The water issue out east is a big one, and so I can see why that one is certainly on the list. But no, I'm happy with the list. I think staff do a great job putting the list together, and I know it's not easy. So I just want to say really thanks to them for the work that goes behind the scenes to putting the list together. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Hickey, Councillor Norton.
I wouldn't have anything other than support for this chair. It's nice to see the level of investment. I mean, obviously it's grown over the last few years. We can see the impact this year of how much construction's in the community, in particular with road work. But I think while it's difficult to manage right now, the end result is always more positive, which is good.
Yes, thank you.
Facilitating the growth in the community.
I do have a couple of questions. First on St. John Water Capital. With regards to, we know that in our long-term plan, we would like to see St. John universally metered, and we know it's very expensive, which is why we don't see it right now. But just a question, one of our prior St. John Council is the comprehensive recreation center, whatever it's going to look like. But we know we want to do it, so we're putting money away to get it done. The question with regards to universal metering, we know it's going to be a big bill someday. We know we're looking for partners. And when that partnership is right, we can move forward. But would we not look at a strategy of having a reserve for that and putting some money away? Could anybody want to take a stab at that? I see Mr. Fogan. Thank you.
Sure, Jerry, I'll take a stab at that. The water utility is a very tricky capital budget, I'll elaborate a little bit. Based on sustaining the infrastructure that we currently have, we need to double the amount of capital investment we currently put in. And so we have quite a few assets right now, like all our water towers and some other pieces that need to be replaced. And to be quite frank, we don't have a whole lot of room in order to put anything away for the future in order to deal with an upcoming large expenditure. Actually, we'd like to be putting more in right now into our current assets than what we currently can afford.
Okay, I know fair statement. I guess I would throw. We know this is an expense that's coming, and as we wait, it gets more expensive. As does all the other infrastructure that we want to replace and improve. And we haven't got to it yet. I wonder if you're setting the table for the. We haven't had a rate increase in many years in the water rate, so I'll leave it there until that meeting. But thanks for the response.
The only other thing I'll add is that we do have in our long-term financial plan, we are looking at a way to be able to afford that in 2028. As you know, the special pension payments also get reduced. But we are including in our long-term financial plan to include universal metering. So we're not forgetting about it. We're including it. We just may not be able to put reserves away for it in advance. That's all.
No, thanks for that comment. That's good. And I know it's hard, just on the whole, we've got, kind of next year's proposed budget in front of us. And one of our goals financially is to have a multi-year capital plan so we can kind of see how all these things lay out. And this just gives, one more reason to have such a plan. I know engineers are very good at saying things like, well, in 6.5 years, this will happen, because that's what they do. But yeah, so we continue to work on that. Thanks. A bit of follow-up on Councillor Radwin's search for a splash pad for the east side. Just one little bit of correction. Ward 1 doesn't have a splash pad, actually. There is a west side splash pad, but it's Ward 3, if you count the opening of Atoli Makahamik, now has 3. Oh, yes. So Ward 1...
So no access to water.
But Ward 1 does have the beautiful Dominion Park. Ward 4's got the res. So there's lots of natural water features throughout the city, is one of our strengths, I think.
Splash pads are our beach replacements.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. We've got lots of water, and that's one of the reasons anybody from outside the city who's listening to the St. John Finance Committee should considering moving into the city. Water everywhere. It's a great spot. Mr. Levine, this is just a receive and file at this point, yes?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
I'll
Okay.
second that.
So Councillor Hickey and her worship, on the question, all in favor, signify by aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Item 6.4 is feedback on our Shape Your Budget. Mr. Levine?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my screen for this last presentation. All right, for the last presentation of the day is the public engagement results for the 2025 operating budget. This was the second year seeking public input using the Shape Your Budget platform. And, we are pleased to see an increase year over year. Online results were 154, which was over double compared to last year. As well as we had 3 completed paper copies that were included. We did facilitate 2 open houses that were facilitated by Chair Sullivan and members of the finance team. However, unfortunately, we did see very little attendance with only 5 members coming to the open houses, with actually only 2 filling out the survey. Overall results for the online participation was consistent with some of our other public engagements. Results would not be representative of the total population. However, there's definitely some good information here to consider as part of the budgeting process. And as well, in your kit, I've included the complete survey from the Shape Your Budget, as well as the comments that members were able to put down at the end of the survey. The next 2 slides are the questions that were in the survey, so I'm not going to go through these in any detail. So here's a snapshot of the top 5 spending priorities based on the public input. As you can see, roads and sidewalks being the highest, followed by affordable housing, police services, snow plowing, and our parks and recreation facilities. Opposite to the previous slide was our lowest 5 priorities. The lowest being arts and culture, followed by climate action, bylaws, service and enforcement, community programming and recreation program were tied, followed by traffic management and then storm management. It was a fairly split between reducing property tax or increasing service levels, depending on if we receive better tax assessment than planned. We looked at the top 5 priorities from the 10-year strat plan, and the highest one is, as you can see here, is the more regional cost sharing was the highest one. Second to that would be our social needs of community. Then investing in our transit and active transportation. And then lastly, invest in the environment, and followed up by the recommendations of our Play SJ plan. Value for tax dollars was fairly split over three areas, being fairly good, fairly poor, and very poor. As you can see from this slide, the majority of our respondents were between the ages of 30 to 59. And from this slide, 76% of our respondents have lived in St. John for more than 5 years. Majority of respondents do not own a business. This slide just represents the household size for each of the respondents. Majority of respondents, 68%, own their own home. And lastly, this slide shows the wide range of the diverse respondents, diversity in our respondents. So the respondents had the opportunity to provide comments and feedback, and all these, as I said earlier, all these respondents are included in your Shape Your Budget report. There were 96 responses that provide a variety of ideas, opinions, and suggestions for the city. What I could say is there were really no consistent themes among the answers. Again, plenty of interesting comments for consideration. And again, in conclusion, the results of this survey are for information purposes only. The results not represented would not be statistically valid. However, public engagement is considered best practice for creating an open and transparent process around the budgeting process. And the recommendation is the Finance Committee receive and file this presentation and the attached documents. Thank you.
I'll move that.
Thanks, Your Worship. Seconder, Councillor Hickey. Questions or comments? Councillor Radlin?
Just a quick comment, Chair. I just wanted to say that it's not a very good poll because of there being a small number of people, obviously, but it was good that the number went up from last year. So we keep getting people more and more engaged. But I have a feeling that if everybody was asked in St. John, the majority would probably like to have their taxes lowered and roads worked on. But anyway, that's just a feeling that I usually get from comments. And the other thing that I think that we need to kind of take note of is that I think a lot of people that are maybe marginalized would not have probably done the survey, because a lot of people that are struggling don't have time to do things like this. But I just wanted to quickly say thank you to you, Chair, and CFO Fudge, Craig Levine, for the really good job you guys did in the open sessions. It was really good. I only attended one, and it was done really, really well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redmond. Your Worship, or other councillors, any comments, questions?
All good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, well done.
It's the two pieces I would suggest. It is an interesting read, going through all of the comments, and while not statistically valid, I really appreciate the folks who took time to fill it out and to leave their comments. A staff point for next year, I guess, as you'll remember and I will forget. We had 4 people show up to one of the public engagements, and while in the presentation it said 5, the one person who showed up to the second engagement was also at the first engagement. So we really had 4 different people. Maybe we just do one of them next year. I like the opportunity. I think the folks who want to be there and want to have discussion and want to be engaged will find a way to get there. We just make sure we pick a time that is a most convenient time and run one. The second piece, actually, very specifically to the question on value for money. If we could add to the survey, I know we have the open questions at the end. That's one where I would be very interested to have an open question, if we can, tagged onto that question that would say, okay, how do you feel is it your value for your tax dollar in St. John? And an opportunity for them to expand at that point on that question. That might actually give us some good information, at least for me. I would love to know why you are choosing that particular tick box. So if we can make a note of that for the folks for next year. At this point in time, this is received for information for us as we go forward in our considerations of budgets as we move forward. Your worship, did you make that motion already to receive?
I did, it's been, yeah, but I
Okay.
just had one quick comment.
Sure.
When I read through the comments, someone said that they would have liked to have had the streets and the sidewalks separated, I think, one of the comments was. So that, I just throw that out there because I know staff would be aware of it, but when they're talking about, you know, road work versus sidewalk work, I think the person interpreted that those two were grouped together. So just a bit of clarification maybe on that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
fair. All right, we have it on the floor. On the question, all in favor signify by aye, raising your hand. Contrary minded, unanimously approved. That's it. Item 7 is the adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Councillor Hickey and her worship. Thanks, everybody. It's kind of nice that we had the audit results from last year that showed a clean audit and a small surplus, but that means we're doing our job and we're on plan, rolling into our specific capital budgets for next year. So it's a good turnover time halfway through the year, and we'll move forward on more budgeting over the next couple of meetings. For those people who are watching and thinking that maybe we're done with public consultation, you have 10 councillors and a mayor who are still listening. If anything here has prompted some thoughts with regards to capital budgets or our operational budget as we move forward, we're still listening. So feel free to reach out to your councillor, to the mayor, to have that conversation, because certainly more conversations are to come with your St. John Council. And with that, and thank you to staff for joining us this afternoon. Paul, your input both in the audit, looking back, and the budgets going forward,